are these. Make sure you turn off your microphone and you turn off your video. That way we won't eat up the bandwidth. We're doing a 5-week deal between Bent Tree and Mission to North America. Bent Tree is an official ministry of Mission to North America. We are a ministry that seeks to remind pastors that they are Christians and pastors and husbands and fathers and brothers and children and friends, but we're extending this out to everybody. We're doing 5 weeks on evangelism. Our speaker today is Al Dayhoff. He'll be speaking next week also. And then Howard Brown, Hal Farnsworth, and our last one will be a tag team between Andreas Zelaya and Jaime Jimenez. That will be each Thursday at 2 o'clock. Let me introduce Al. I've only met Al once. Actually, we met in prison. We were both doing a nickel for white collar PCA crimes. He was in for practicing intinction without a license, and I was in there for speaking on the floor of General Assembly under the influence of wild turkey. What I do know about Al is that Al did go to college. He went to Bob Jones University, and so you're going to see him work out his tacky fundamentalism on screen. He also went to Covenant Seminary and got a few degrees from there. He's been married for quite some time. I have no idea how long. He has 2 children and 2 grandchildren and some chocolate labs. And he writes books that you should buy. You can get them at EvangelizeToday.Info, and he'll have that up there. And Al, if you want to go ahead and start us with prayer, we'll just go ahead and get started. And remember, turn off your mics, turn off your video. I'm going to leave mine on because Al wants me to make sure that things aren't going crazy.
Very good. Thank you, Dave. And thank you, Dave and Bent Tree. What a wonderful, wonderful, timely ministry. Thank you, MNA. My goodness, the amount of brain power and creativity in MNA right now, very, very exciting under Paul Hahn's leadership. And Chris Vogel, who has befriended me and partnered with me in so many ways, just thank you for that. And I see my friend John Smed is on, and what great work he's been doing. Let me pray. Lord, would you guide us? Would you show us the way? Would you create more questions than answers? Would your spirit ring true what it wants to ring true in us? Lord, these are your great servants in this room. Would you bless them? And I pray in our Lord's name, amen. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to my whiteboard, and then I'm going to come back down to my screen. So can you see me, Dave, on my whiteboard?
Yes, I can see you zooming in. It's not the big screen. The big screen is your slide, but yeah, I can see.
Can everybody see the whiteboard?
They'd have to nod their heads.
Okay. So hopefully you all can see this. So there are 4 values that I move from. And these values come from, that flow from a working laboratory, my parish, into our books, into our workshop, our conference, and in our residency cohorts. These are the 4 values. And by the way, with my friends, I say, I get to say anything I want, and you get to ignore anything I say. And so let me show you my 4 values. The first one is shifting from listening to reply to listening to hear. The first value shifting from listening to reply to listening to hear. 85% of the population is not coming into our structures, our religious structures right now. And we continue to stay in the listening to reply metric. The second value that I work from is I believe we are re-entering the age of the parish. This is probably a terrible analogy, and maybe somebody can email me a better one. The difference between caged chickens and free-range chickens has been out there in the grocery debates. We are now in the age of the free-range chickens. And do we have a mindset and a minister that can go and re-enter the age of the parish? The third value that I work from is this: a research introspection discovery metric of sharing the gospel. We are now in the age of fake news. People only believe what they discover. The image of God in our time and space loves to be researched. And the fourth value is love. That evangelism is love. It is when somebody feels that they are loved, it's amazing what changes. These are the four values of the Evangelize Today ministry. And if you're wondering where Al is pivoting from, this would include an answer to that. So I'm going to erase this, and then I'm going to show you the 5 workshops that we have. So the second context is, okay, Al, what are the 5 workshops? And by the way, I think it was sent out. Next week, we have a number of workshops going on. The first workshop, which we find is pivotal, is why is the wall of the bubble thickening? Why is the wall of our bubble thickening in this time and space? We found one habit that the larger church, evangelical church, is doing that is creating the thickening of the bubble, or as I'll go through, the echo chamber. The thoughtfulness of this group right here, you're going to like this one. The second one is 5,000 interviews of tattoos. This is sort of our what piece, and I'm going to do this next Thursday at 2 o'clock. I suspect that the image of God has gotten so desperate to talk, it's writing its stories and secrets on the live canvas of the skin in permanent ink, and I completely missed it. The metric of evangelism that I was taught was a truthing, telling, presenting metric of evangelism. And the larger world has gotten so desperate to be the one that's talking, it's writing on its wrapper now the most intimate thoughts, and I completely missed it for 55 years. So that's going to be next week. You're going to like that workshop. The third one is 8,000 findings from 8,000 evangelism encounters. That's what we're going to go over today. The fourth one is why can't we listen to hear? Why is this muscle missing in this life cycle in history? Why does it seem that we are calcified in listening to reply? In other words, we're even using our mind to wait for our turn. And the culture is longing for a listening to hear moment. And then the fifth one, are the 6 seasons in my Blues Bar parish. Some of you have read the Blues Bar book. We built a big building. It filled up with Christians from all the struggling churches around us. I said, I'm done. And I wanted to spend my final trimester around as many non-Christians as possible. I did what all PCA pastors do when we get struggle, we go to a blues bar. And I went to a blues bar near my church and I never left, and have got about 500 very non-Christians that call me Pastor Al, and we have a service in the bar. It's been one of the greatest journeys of my life, and I hope it never ends. And then we're starting to work on a 6th workshop, which will pivot off a book that's coming out at the end of May called The Confessor, How Did I Miss This? And that workshop will come out in late May. So these are the 5 workshops that we have, and we're going to be doing 2 of them, one today and one next Thursday. So let me come back to the slide. Let me get myself on here. There we go. Okay, Dave, can you see my screen, The Naked Truth About Evangelism?
Yes.
Okay, I have more material than we can go through today, but we'll get to where we can, okay?
Sounds good.
We asked this question, what is the elephant in the room? What is behind this fable is something is so big, we can no longer see it. I remember when I first went to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, I went, oh, wow, that's a big mountain, you know, and I was looking at it and someone tapped me on the shoulder and they said, no, look up there. And it was, the mountains were above the clouds. What has become the elephant in the room now in our tribe? Do these thoughts come to mind? And I'll let you read those. And these thoughts. So the question is, and I think one good question to start with is evangelism even working? And in the quiet places of our mind, when we're with ourselves and we introspect about where we are and how we're being used in ministry, and we sort of step off the stage into an optic from a side view, this is a question that I think is reasonable. Is it even working? And it's interesting, God didn't put this group of people in 1610. He didn't put them in 1805. He didn't put them in 1903. He put them in 2020. And we are the stewards to figure out what is the life cycle that we're in, what is the way in which the gospel is transferred, what is unique about our time. And I think that's one of the things all of us have in common here. So Al, where did you get your data from? Let me tell you where I got it from. And I sort of have this idea. I neither agree nor disagree with what I'm going to show you. It's what we found. From our evangelism conferences, we've done about 50 of those, and everybody does an evangelism encounter. From my blues bar, I've got about 500 non-Christians that are always talking to me about faith issues. And then we've got about 40 residents that have come and studied with me for a year, and they have done profound work. We've collected all that data, and I've put it in here. And I neither agree nor disagree with what I'm going to show you. It's what I found. So Dave, give me about 4 or 5 more minutes, and then we can have a question time. Churches are marketing to Christians and other churches. Sounds like we're reshuffling the deck. We are now in a life cycle where more churches are chasing fewer church transfers, and more graduating seminary ministers are chasing fewer staff positions. It's not going to get ugly out there. It is ugly. We also found this in our studies with church planters. Church planters, on average, recollect Christians that have had 6 prior pastors and 6 prior churches. So even our Marines, the guys that we've enabled to go out and start a church, are largely just recollecting church Christians from other churches. We're re-swapping. And if you look closely at our marketing ideas and thoughts, we are actually marketing to Christians in other churches. And now we have 3, 4 generations of ministers that have recollected Christians their whole lifetime and have been in this conversation, come to this church, not this church. There's no bad people here. That's not the point. The point is, where are we as we look down upon what's the situation? There are 2 elephants in the room when you come to share faith with me. We found that this is what was behind the screen. Here's the first one. And you would agree with me on this. If your God is so great, why is my life so hard? In my blues bar parish, Julia, on the way out of the bar, said, Pastor Al, did your God create COVID-19? And I paused, and she said, you can keep your God, Pastor Al. And I said, I get it, Julia. I get it. I understand. This is the great challenge. Here's the second elephant we found. When nobody's looking, Pastor Al goes into his prayer closet and looks to heaven and goes, really? Really? You thought that was a good idea? This is not all bad. The point being is we tend to communicate in front narrative, but we tend to think in the back narrative. And the back narrative of the Christian and the non-Christian are the same back narrative. And this is not all bad, by the way, and you'll see why.
Al, excuse me a second, but did you
Yes.
want to do break rooms now, or were you waiting?
Give me 2 minutes to give them a little more material, and then we'll break.
Great.
Okay?
Thank
But
you.
hold me to 2 minutes, Karen.
Okay, will do.
So people don't like talking with people who act as though they're always right. We picked up a strong paternalism in the wild. In other words, this truthing, telling, presenting, the culture's done. Al, do you think we've over-presented in the culture? I think 2 things are going on. On the one hand, we're over-truthing, telling, and presenting, and the culture's done with our presentations. And on the other hand, we sit in complete silence and have no contact outside of our Christian bubble. There tends to be 2 extremes going on right now. So what happens is Al Dayhoff at First Baptist Church preaches, and his people go out and preach. And how's that going? How's that going right now? Giving you a big answer. I'm telling you what we've picked up in the wild as being a big problem. So if I could put this in Bubba language, it's this. And everybody knows this, by the way, the Christian, the non-Christian, the churches. Could you hurry up and become a Christian? We got bills to pay here. And so we want to get them online as quickly as possible. And the incubation time is simply not there right now. We rush people into the gospel. We now find that there's confusion about how to give the gospel presentation. And this invitation, come to my church, has become, come into this culture, has now become one of the ways we evangelize. And now 85% of the population is not coming back in those structures. However, we found talking about Jesus as a philosopher, we'll do a 30 or minute more conversation. Karen?
Yes?
Why don't we break for a minute?
Okay, great.
And then just tell me when to come back in.
Okay. We'll take care of that.
Okay, thank you. Good luck with that.
Got strict instructions from the boss.
Summer revenue and very uncertain, as everyone is, of what the fall will look like. It seems most likely right now that most likely scenario is that colleges and universities will be allowed to return to campus, but there will be limitations on size gatherings, which in some respects is much more threatening for the University of Alabama and Auburn than it is for us, since we don't have a 100,000 seat football stadium. We're thankful for that this year. And so we're right now.
Everybody make sure you turn off your screen and turn off your mic. Al, you're muted and we're ready to go.
Can you hear me, Dave?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Okay, so well done. If I could rename the Evangelize Today ministry, one of the names would be introspection, because that's where discovery happens. So this next slide is, people don't care if it's true. They want to know, does it work? And I've got about 10 findings on this one slide, but let me say this one. We were very surprised that the people we are sharing faith with are actually doing their own interview and testing our motives, our veracity, and what are we really up to? Are we trying to get them in a building? What's our motive? And the non-Christian has become very, very savvy about this encounter. So this is a passing one. People are born into their beliefs about faith through their family. Pastor Al, if I do get religion, somebody in my parish blues bar said, I'll go back and check on that Jewish family I came from. That's where I'll start if I do decide to get religion in my life. Permission is now required. In my time and age, there seemed to be this thing you could walk up to a stranger and share faith. Now down in the South, there's permission, but people know all the right answers down in the South that our residents found everybody's a Christian. Up north, it's a little bit different, or northwest, and it's sort of like this. Did you see some sign on me that said you could start that Jesus talk thing? Did I give you permission to enter into this space? Did you hijack the space that I was in with your presentation? And so permission is an interesting thing. Permission is time. It's empathy. It is waiting for the question. It's mercy. And sometimes people just are given permission because they have a body language or an ethos about them that people want to talk to them. That's what we found. People are saying I'm spiritual but not religious. You guys know this. Spiritual is Starbucks, yoga, nature. Religious is homophobic, misogynist, structures, angry, money. What's interesting about Starbucks is its community. We studied yoga, and you know what the core of yoga is? It's finding the inner voice. I'd like to say something that maybe some of you will take me on at some point. As I have been on the journey into the wild the past 5 years, into my parish and around the country, I grow in deeper respect of the image of God in the non-Christian every day. It's there. I didn't have ears for it. And nature, of course, is God's Genesis 1. We find that the Western church kind of got stuck on Genesis 3. You have a problem, you're going to hell, you need Jesus. Culture, in its trauma state, longs for us to begin at Genesis 1, the blessing. And I can talk more about that at some point. People carry bad generational church stories. Basically, if my grandfather hated the priest, I'm wired to hate the priest. We found this in the wiring of the culture. Depending on what metric you're looking at, whether it be the Pew surveys or Barna, the whole point is that the percentage of regular attending evangelicals in churches is going down and down. And as immigration rises, and of course we're in a space right now where it's been blocked, people are bringing more and more of their religions into the United States. There was a time when people came to the United States to become a Christian. Not so now. This is a whole workshop all its own, but we tend to have big targets with our real estate and institutions. The secular Christian values are basically this: I'm a good person, I put my hand on my heart. The mainline Christian values are, there was somebody named Jesus, let's not get too crazy about the inspiration stuff. The evangelical Christian values, which is this group, is front and center on such things as the homosexual debate. And now we are being pressured to lighten up and who we allow in our buildings and who we don't. That's a whole nother discussion. People have left the church buildings and they're not coming back. And we are now taking our young ministers out of a brick and mortar church, putting them in a seminary, putting them through a credentialing process, putting them in a ministerial association, putting them back in a brick and mortar church, and they can only think and imagine in that metric. And here we have now shifted to the age of the parish, and we need to rethink how we do this whole thing. Let me say this, is I think the brick and mortar is more relevant than ever, but it's a place where Christians recollect. We speak in code. My residents pay me in part to be in my parish, in my blues bar. And I always have blues bar peeps who have more education than me, by the way. If they go to a church, they report back to me like it's a really big, important thing for me to know. And it just happened a few weeks ago, and they said, before this pandemic, they said, what in the world were those people talking about? We are now in a life cycle where our ministers are preaching to people who have heard 500 sermons, and we have to parse and divide pieces into smaller and smaller pieces to keep our base coming in the building. We speak in code, and we tend to like our code. Confusion now exists of the gospel proposal. What is it? And has it gotten so complex? There was one Easter that I was speaking to my parish, and I talked about the thief on the cross that said, could you just remember me? And Jesus said, you're going to be in heaven with me today. And my bar peeps, the people in my parish, said, there is no way that's in the Bible, because that was them. They felt forgotten. That's what a blues bar is, by the way, forgotten people. Fear. We're fearing whether we're going to get paid, whether our buildings are going to get, how many social distancing people can we fit in our buildings? Have we created a metric of a minister and a ministry for an age decades ago, and now we're entering into a whole different age? We fear being sued. And so are we in the age of fear? And my point is this, is not to light our hair with fire of kerosene and light it up and run around in circles. If we are in the age of fear, this is the troop that God prepared to minister in this space. And I think the church and his people and the gospel are more relevant than ever. And my experience is the wild, that space outside the church building, loves having a minister in their space if he or she knows how to be there. I'm trying to channel our average minister here, who has to be a scholar and a great evangelist. And we find this, by the way, the more non-Christians a minister knows, the better his mental health. We've gone through a life space now where we built the pastor scholar, right? He's among the 1% most educated beings in the history of civilization. We then adapted and built the pastor evangelist, who is evangelizing behind the pulpit. I think we are now in a life space of trying to build and bring on our staffs and into our thinking something I call the scholar evangelist. And it's all about making discoveries out in the wild. Go and make disciples. The harvest is plentiful. He who captures souls is wise. Forgiveness of sins should be proclaimed. This is a big one. We are now answering questions people are not asking, and we tend to be fixated on our apologetics, and the larger culture is not, but we still are. I suspect at the beginning of the evangelism journey with somebody is when they tell us what hurts. But we tend to still be in our truthing, telling, presenting metric with our encounters. The culture is in a different place now. I get this all the time in my parish. I had somebody say, Pastor Al, I wish I could believe all that stuff. And I knew this one soul and had spoken to her many times. And I said this to her. I said, Jan, let me hold your place and I'll believe for you and we'll take whatever time it takes. And she said, okay, Pastor Al. And she came to faith, by the way. There's a big difference between listening to reply, and this is how we are using our evangelism minds in the world today. We have so much knowledge, we simply want to get that knowledge out when it's our time to speak. But the culture has shifted, and we are now in a listening to hear. And I wonder if we have heard where the world is for some time now. How am I doing, Dave?
You're doing great. Are you ready? You want us to break out?
Let me say 2 more slides and then we'll break out. The non-Christian wants to be ministered to first and then part of their evangelism journey second. In other words, the Western metric is get converted, come to membership class, welcome to the community. That's working for church transfers. It's the opposite. Welcome into the community. Welcome into membership. Have you considered conversion? Let's stop there, Dave, and lead us in a breakout.
All right, go ahead, Karen, break us out. If you guys need the questions, check the chat and it'll show up there. Hello. There we go.
Yeah, everyone should start flowing into their break rooms now.
Yeah, you can. Some of them know each other, but not. They're from all over the country
For your denomination.
and overseas. Dave, you with us?
Yeah, we're not getting enough time to talk.
Ah, our tribe doesn't like to talk.
We're having to wait too long to give answers, Al.
Oh.
Should we make it a little longer, the breakout sessions?
Are we ready, Dave?
Lead on.
Okay, my friend, I'm going to be moving a little quickly now. Two things I want to say is I'm going to be staying on after this workshop's over for any questions and answers. And then I want to invite you to our website, EvangelizeToday.Info. And we have workshops all next week as well. And then we're going to kind of recalibrate the need and interest. And we're also doing, I'm doing a free workshop, one free workshop for a number of churches around the country as well as by way of introduction. So let's jump back in. The Judeo-Christian ethic is now housed in a museum, and most of our evangelism thinking is presuppositional and assumes that people have the Judeo-Christian ethic. This is over. It is in a museum, meaning it is a distant memory. But the way people now believe in truth, we tend to begin to talk and think and present as though they're here and they're not even in the room. But the image of God is alive and well and wanting a relationship. Now, I use tattoos as an illustration in many ways. I think the image of God has gotten so desperate to talk in this time and space. It's writing its stories and secrets on the live canvas of the skin in permanent ink. And Al Dayhoff completely missed it. Mainly because I was deep in a structure, and tattoos tend not to fit in the structure, nor do the secrets of the culture. The image of God is alive and well. Here's what we found as well. The longer someone talks, the more they talk themselves towards God. But who tends to be doing the talking when we evangelize? Right? We also found this: the longer someone tattoos, the more they tattoo themselves towards God. Is the image of God sending a message to the owner through the tattoo? Isn't that an interesting question? It appears that God designs a specific speaker and receiver in the faith proposal. We do our evangelism conference, and a grandparent calls and interviews a grandchild and writes them a faith letter. All I can say is it's magical. Would you keep a letter from your grandfather for the rest of your life about how to get to heaven? So we find that the receiver and the speaker is very unique. We did a study on what is the mother of all questions, right? What is the question everybody asks? Me, the guy across the street, the Christian, the non-Christian. Here's what we found. Where are you? Where are you? And you know where that is in Genesis 3, where God was walking towards Adam. And it's a shocking moment that God, in that moment, who, by the way, was the first evangelist, what were the words of the first evangelist? Where are you? And by the way, you know what tattoos are all about? Here's where I am. Here's what's happening to me. It's the answer to this question. So the most important listener might be the person talking or taking a go at what they believe about the origin of God, Jesus, and life after death. In other words, the thing that I missed is that the person I was listening to was actually processing out loud and working with answers, and I was rushing in and stopping their processing with the right answer. The most important listener might be the person listening to their own answers. I'm not an Islam phobe, but they sort of know who they are, and whether that will be a sleeper cell or whether they'll be westernized, maybe it depends on whether the Christian community can make its way into the wild. And I consider the wild the space outside the church, by the way. Time to rethink your evangelism budget. I think, you know, I get to come on these and then I leave, right? So I get to say anything I want. I think 5% of your budget should be in evangelism training. And I know everything is evangelism, but begin to put evangelism training in your budget. And there's many good ones out there. Pick one, but begin to think outside your building, because we're going to shrink. Where do we go from here? This tells a little bit about who I am and what I'm about. I'm going to go through it very quickly. So how accurate is our ground intelligence? I say it's pretty bad. We found with our young ministers, we studied seminary students, and they shouted out on Facebook on 4 areas. 1, when they got married, or some of them when they got a date. 2, when they got their first house. 3, when they got their first baby. And the 4th thing they shouted on is when they passed credentialing exams, right? Boom. What we found is our ministers are going out into the wild credentialing versus evangelizing. This is what we're creating in the system. There's no bad people here. The ground shifted under our feet and we're in a new life space. We're partnering with pastors and churches and organizations. We have a conference. We have our books, our workshop, our conference, our residency. I like number 2 here. Most people have been writing a faith letter in their head to a specific person, sometimes for decades. It's like somebody is in there that we've been thinking about for a long time on how to share faith. And we call that person and interview them, by the way, in the conference. These are values that we use. We have part-time and full-time residencies. If you want more information on that, look on our website. These are our residency values. Let me move on. We have a residency for youth pastors. We're working, I spoke at the Francis Schaeffer lectures last year. That was a delight. Love Covenant Seminary. We're working on whole church partnerships. This is our little blue church, my parish. They make me cry. They just make me cry. These are people I paid to say nice things about me.
And then we're gonna just type in what the new stuff, and then I'll show you how to use it.
We start with a workshop, and this is part 1 of a 5-part workshop.
Go ahead and type it.
Hey, Al, we're getting to the hour of the day. Should we break out into our last group?
Please do. I'm finished.
All right. Karen, please break us out, and then we'll come back. And if you all want to stay on, you can ask Al questions
I'll be here.
via the chat.
Okay, you'll soon be sorted into your different break rooms.
All right, Al, any closing words? If folks want to stay on and ask questions via the chat thing, we'll be here to answer those. If any of you preacher types have enjoyed sitting around talking about this stuff, you may want to check out Bent Tree. We do this a few times a year, not virtually. We're doing it now virtually because of this thing, but you might enjoy hanging around a campfire with a cigar and a beverage of your choice talking about these things versus a computer screen. But Al, go ahead and take us out. And if Jonathan Inman, are you still on here? If you would close us in prayer when Al said his parting words.
Yes, sir. Thank you for Bent Tree Ministries. Support this ministry. Thank you for MNA leadership. Man, they're reinventing and thinking really hard in this time and space. Can you imagine? Thank you for Chris Vogel and his ministry. Go to our website, EvangelizeToday.Info. If you survive that and want to email me, do so. EvangelizeToday.Info. My email is evangelizetoday@gmail.com. And we're doing workshops all next week, and then we're going to relook and then schedule a whole bunch more as well. And I'll be back on here next Thursday with the tattoo one, which you're going to enjoy, by the way, at 2 o'clock next Thursday, Eastern time.
All right, Jonathan, close us in prayer, and then if y'all want to stick on for questions, just stay on.
All right, let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you so much that you sent people into our lives to not just tell us about Jesus, but to show us how to trust and follow him. Lord, thank you for those people, those parents, those friends, those siblings, those strangers that took a risk to help us to get to know you. Lord Jesus, thank you that you came to seek and to save the lost. Thank you that you have saved us, and you're in the business of saving more lost people. Would you please give us the privilege of being your instruments to see your love rescue lost sinners like ourselves? Lord, would you change us to become more like you by the power of your Spirit, that we could take up our cross and follow you, and that we could serve the people around us the way you serve lost sinners. Lord, would you please help us to be humble and dependent upon you, and to show others what it looks like to trust you. Lord, thank you so much for Al and his willingness to admit his own weaknesses and failings, and to be able to give us an opportunity to learn from his mistakes and learn from his hard knocks. Thank you that you've given him perseverance so that he could see and hear and learn things that are helpful to others. Lord, would you please help us to learn, help us to not just listen to reply, but listen to hear to what Al has to say, to what we might hear from the people in our churches, but also to the lost around us who need the gospel. Father, please, please glorify yourself even in our weakness. We ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Al, as I was looking through the chat room, I saw a couple questions that might be good to start off with. This is Chris, by the way.
Oh, Chris. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. The first one was, would you mind kind of expanding on, talking a little bit more about your definition of parish?
Yeah. So we talked about, and I gave that kind of crude illustration between caged chickens and free range, and we are now in the free range chicken setting. I think one of the best illustrations in history of parish is when St. Patrick, when he was a teenager, he was stolen from Britain by the pirates from Ireland, and he was made a slave. And he broke free and he went back to Britain and he refound his grandfather's religion. And he was in a monastery and they asked him, Patrick, what do you want to do? And he says, I want to go back to the pirates. And they said, could you please come to your senses? And he left. And he went to Southern Ireland and he stood in the middle of the brogue and he said, I am yours and you are mine. Let's just figure it out. My opinion is the wild, the space outside the brick and mortar church longs for a minister in their space. Most of what we have done under all good intentions, even when we do pub theology or we do outreach, we are still truthing, telling, and presenting metrics. A parish is a space that you adopt and they adopt you, and it unfolds as it unfolds. A parish has certain habits to it. So this is one of the habits I learned, is listening. But listening wasn't enough. I had to learn to hear. And then hearing wasn't enough. And I had to learn to hold, like depositing a book in a library. And the journey of rediscovering the role of the confessor, of listening and hearing and holding. And I watched faith and healing stir. And another way to think about that is, I say my bar peeps, they do all the work. They do all the work. And my job is to come in with a quiet soul where I can listen and hear. And they accepted me in that setting. And I regularly become, we don't have a church, we do have a service there right in the bar. It's now on Zoom. But Blue Church happens anytime I walk in the bar, which is several times a week when I'm in town. So a parish is often a whole group of non-Christians. The church planners that I'm working with in a residency, we begin with this idea that you're going to have 75 people in Presbyterian church on Sunday. You're going to have 75 people out in the wild who will never come into your Presbyterian church. That's your parish. And by the way, it's those in the wild will keep you growing and wanting to be in the ministry. That's some thoughts.
Thank you. Very, very
And also,
much.
this book, Church in a Blues Bar, talks about some of that stuff.
Awesome. Another quick question before we can continue to open it up on the chat screen there. Could you clarify your statement or at least your thoughts around people being admitted to the church before they're Christians?
You know, so a parish is full of Christians and non-Christians. What I found is brick and mortar has only one way of thinking. It's the system of coming into the brick and mortar. But what happens is, and we even have membership as a strict thing within the brick and mortar church. You're a member of the brick and mortar church. Well, we're moving past the age of brick and mortar. The vast majority of the population is not going back in, but you can be part of a parish as a non-Christian. So here's one of the battles that we're in, and this is going to be controversial, but this is sort of my job, right? There are all these debates like Bent Tree, or not Bent Tree, there's no debate there. Revoice, what's the word I'm looking for? The debate about homosexuality, the revoice. I think at the core of that is building brain. In other words, that the culture no longer fits in our buildings. The culture no longer fits in our buildings. And so it's all about, can they come in our structures? I've got about 50 homosexual friends right now. I am theirs, they are mine. we play the long game as long as it takes for them to come to faith. They're part of my parish. Now, do we have a blue church where people come and attend? Yes, we do. And do we serve communion in the church and fence the table at Blue Church? Absolutely. But we need a minister now that can go into the wild like a missionary going into Africa in the 1840s and learning their language, learning their food, learning their culture, and seeing if they could be accepted. This is where we're at. The directional of our evangelism is building brain. Every thought, every idea, every dollar, every vision leads into the building. And the people that are going into our buildings are Christians from other churches.
Thank you so much. The last question I had here was access to resources. Could you go back through that again? In other words, are there video or are there other things that folks could use in their churches that you have access to?
Well, we don't. One is on EvangelizeToday.Info, we have a list of our workshops. And by the way, I am now scheduling. We did 38 workshops around the country last year where I would come into a church and anywhere from 10 to 100 people came to the workshop. And this is one of the segments that I show. I show 5 different segments, including just a lot of give and take with people. You know, it's not my job to come in and be a shock jock with Blues Church. It's to take the baby step principles and say, you won't believe how much the world would love to have a minister in their presence. There are books here. The first book I wrote was called Church in a Blues Bar, Rethinking Evangelism in the Post-Christian Culture. And it talks about Parish. When I accepted that that bar was my space, my optics changed. And for the first time, I cared about a tattoo. I don't have any. And I asked a lady, does your tattoo have a story? And she poured out all her secrets for 3 hours. And I said, how did I miss this? And so went and did 1,000 tattoo interviews all over the country. This has been a ridiculous journey that I get invited to about 20 tattoo conventions a year. I don't even have any tattoos. But this is one of the greatest ground intelligence. I mean, we woke up on a planet where people were putting their most intimate thoughts on their skin, and I missed it. So I suspect, that the spiritual disciplines needed for evangelism in this time and space are housed in the ability to see, hear, and earn the trust of a tattoo. So that's a book you'll find interesting. It's got a study guide in it too. With the residents that I worked with, we found huge difficulty. And we've got about 40 PCA, mostly PCA ministers that have studied with me in the residency. And my job is to study them, get in their head, and fight for them. And I wrote a book called The Genius in Your Wound. In other words, the reason why somebody couldn't shift from listening to reply to listening to hear is because they were so full of noise. And we took a different optic on it and said, there's actually a genius in your wound. And then, Chris, I've got a book coming out at the end of May. I don't even have a cover, but it's called The Confessor, How Did I Miss This? And it's really the story about the parish, what I learned in my parish. I've got a book coming out in September called Can We Re-Find Lewis and Clark? Breaking Out of the Echo Chamber. In other words, how do we get in the wild?
Hey,
So,
Al.
Those are a few thoughts.
Hey, Al, could Gary Purdy speak to his experience in following your path? Gary, if you want to unmute and show us your lovely face.
Yeah, here I am, just to talk about the residency that I've experienced.
And just, yeah, how's this been working for you? I mean, you basically walked away from normal church and are doing abnormal church.
Yeah, I did. I miscalculated my core group. The beautiful thing is it forced me into the wild, and we have no building. And so I work in shared workspace, which gives me lots of opportunities to engage with people who are also doing startups, and most of whom are not followers of Christ. And so I've done close to 75 interviews with unchurched people that first I listened to their story, and then I asked them 5 questions. And, you know, normally after I listen to their story, they trust me enough to tell me what they believe. If I persuade them that I'm not going to use that as an opportunity to share what I believe, I'm just there to listen. And somewhere in the mix of that, I experienced what Al's talking about, of bonding in the arena of being a shared image bearer. That in some ways, church culture has flattened a little bit for many of us, but those that have rejected it seem pretty robust. And I'm finding people to give permission, not first to spiritual things, to emotional things. You know, in a "this is us" culture, we can talk about deep emotional things, and oftentimes people are willing to go there. So a rich, magical bond develops, and I've become a pastor to a lot of atheists and agnostics, as many as are in my little bitty church. And it has been life-giving. It's scary because of sustainability, but it's beautiful and energizing just every day. And I keep doing things that cultivate those kind of conversations, but I'm not really trying to see those people come into our meeting, but I'm letting them control the pace, and it's been gold. The other piece of it has been Al's coaching that shepherds my heart and yet calls me to action at the same time. I've really never had anybody who could do both of those things, and he never presses me past where my heart is, and he calls me to move out in my woundedness, but in the genius of what God has done in it. So it's just really been invaluable for me in starting a church that has a really long on-ramp, that really is focused on the unchurched. I'm going to have to figure out some sustainability things as I go, and I'm working on that. But it's been priceless. It's been so valuable to me.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Does anybody else have anything else? Otherwise, we're gonna shut her down.
Hey, Buzz. I got one thing. Al, I just put something in the chat there. I'm not sure if you can see the chat on your screen, but this is a thought experiment that might get me into trouble, but I hope not too much in this group.
I love thought experiments.
Okay, so I think, and this is the language that's difficult, I think we have to reconsider what's the controlling domain. So far for us, the controlling domain has been theology. But I think when you put the missionary hat on, missiology becomes the controlling domain. It's not that missionaries don't have theology, it's that it's not the controlling domain for them. It's one of the tools in their belt. Missiology is the controlling domain. Is that a fair way to put it?
I think that's a fair way. I can come at this from a back door. I don't know, are you asking me to respond?
Yeah.
Can I come in through a back door on this?
You can do whatever Buzz will let you.
Okay, well, Buzz is the boss and I obey him. So let me come into a back door. And Matt, your missiology is right on. But let me show you what I think is one of our fundamental missteps. By the way, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Here's the fundamental misstep that I find in our tribe, the evangelical tribe, is this. Thinking plus thinking equals thinking. Okay? We have built the pastor scholar. And we put him in a building, behind a pulpit, behind a book, and he brings this piece of scholarship to people who have heard 500 sermons. And thinking plus thinking equals more thinking. And by the way, he has to think even more to keep from going into boredom, in my opinion. I can unpack that at some point. Here's what I think we could or should go to, or what Matt's words about starting with missiology is thinking plus field work equals discovery. Okay? Apple Computer, when Steve Jobs was part of that whole thing, he took his young engineers and he said, go watch people, go sit and take notes. And what we have done is we have built this metric and we continue to build it deeper. We have the 1% most educated beings in the history of civilization in our pack. And we need them doing field work and we need them making discoveries. May I use a cartoon-like example that's really not a cartoon? Is that okay, Dave?
Yes.
So I was in my bar, which is my parish, which I just love being in. And in walked 6'6" men, okay? Any of them could have killed me, except all of them had mini skirts and stilettos on. Cross-dressing is one of the most prevalent, growing habits in the wild. It nowhere near fits in a building. Would you agree? And yet it's exploding. So Paulette, the bartender, said, Pastor Al, would you like to meet them? And I said, well, sure. I didn't know that what she was going to do. And she walked over and pulled out a chair from their table. And I sat down and she said to them, this is Pastor Al. He comes with the bar. The word awkward comes to mind. I'm out there, but that was really out there. And I said, look, I just want to understand. And the one guy said, understand this, you can leave our effing table. And I waited. And one of them said, what do you want to know? And I've got about 10 of them now that are talking to me. And you know what at the core of all that cross-dressing stuff is? One of the discoveries, which we want to write a book in a few years called Come Meet My Cross-Dressing Friends. You know, that might get me disbarred. But at the core of it is the absence of feeling special. And so that was a discovery that I never would have made through the thinking metric. That's one of my answers.
Thank you.
I trust our tribes. It makes me a little crazy because our tribe can see things in slow motion and we desperately need them in the wild making discovery.
All right, anybody else? Okay, we'll see you next week. You just click leave the meeting and we'll send out a register for next week and you'll get the link and we'll and spread the word so we can get more folks on here. Thank you.
I think Karen is putting me on as host, so I'll stay on in case anybody wants to stay on and talk.
All right.
I
Thank
think.
you, Al. Thank you, Buzz. Great stuff.
Welcome.
See you next week.
Al, I'm checking out.
Okay, friend. Thank you, David.
All right. I'll holler at you next week.
All right. God bless you, friend.
All right. See you, man.
Pastor Al, I have a question for you.
Who am I talking to?
I met you at South Florida. You came to give a seminar at our presbytery. My name is Pablo.
Wonderful. Yes,
and,
sir.
Yeah, I cannot believe, because I was going to write you actually, because I have a question. There was like a soft-cover book about the tattoos that came out, and I read it. And I have to say, I was a little frustrated because, I mean, you gave beautiful stories, but I didn't hear one story of conversion. And
Right.
now I saw a big book that you have there. I'm hoping that there are some conversion stories there, or at least some, because I know that people that you met in this book is people that you see in a restaurant. I mean, I have encountered with people like that I might never see again.
Right.
So my question was, great that we have a great insight on tattoos, but what about these people that you talked with? Was there a gospel presentation or maybe a tract that you left with them? Because I mean, some of those stories are really heartfelt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question.
Uh-huh.
Why do you expect a gospel proposal at a tattoo interview?
That was the question that came to mind as these people open their hearts. You know, yeah, there's one lady in particular that has some, I think, baby birds, and I guess she lost her baby. You know, and as you mentioned, you know, with thinking. What is it that we as pastors we've trained for? You know, I believe that we train to give hope, to give the gospel, and what's better hope than the gospel. So that, I think that's what drives me. And I have to confess that I know I told some pastors back then when you came that it's like it seems like it's too long. And I think we also have to remind ourselves that we also there to plant seeds, don't necessarily, have the tree already grown at once, but leave the seed planted, and, let God have others water it, or, whatever it is. But when I see the seed, to me, I understand it's the gospel. Christ, redemption, forgiveness of sins, opportunity to come to Him. That's why that's the question. I guess I'll answer my question that way. I felt a need as I hear this story, so heartbreaking.
Right. Let me answer it in an odd way. And by the way, thank you for the question. One is there's a chapter in the book called "Did God Write on Jesus' Skin?" Right? And I've got about 8,000. I am part of that community. I've gone to about 40 tattoo conventions. And if you can imagine the time it took for me to earn credibility in that culture as a white guy with no tattoos who is almost 60 years old, it can be very easily perceived as mocking. In fact, it was initially. And again, I think that the metric that my generation taught your generation is this truthing, telling, presenting metric. And so one of my answers is, Al, when do you share faith? And I say, when they ask. And they do ask. And the culture longs for us to hold their pain. And that's not a muscle in our culture right now, in the evangelical culture. We have answers. The culture wants us to hold their pain and stay in their company. And much of the gospeling that I see going on as a stranger walking up to a stranger and giving a proposal, I think God can use anything. And God can use that. one of the things that I'm proposing is stay in your community and stay with them and get to know them and wait for when they ask you. And I get asked all the time in my parish, including the tattoo community, which to earn credibility in that community is a very fragile walk. If you get the reputation that go tell Al about his tattoo and then he's going to tell you what the answers are, that's a whole different reputation. So,
okay.
but I understand your question, friend.
Oh, thank you.
Anybody else?
Al, not really a question, but just to say thank you. This has been great. I really appreciate it. I look forward to next week.
You're welcome, friend. I hope it's of use. I see Chris Ruffner is on. Chris, how are you?
Hey there, Al. How are you, brother?
I am good, friend. You being nice to you?
I'm sorry?
Are you being nice to yourself?
By God's grace, getting better with it. But I wanted to piggyback off what you just said. I think as I've gotten out into the wild a lot more, particularly in the last year of getting to know you, you always talk about how your generation taught my generation how to tell the truth. And I think that that's our mindset, is that we have to get the gospel presentation out in the first conversation, which I'm just as passionate about that happening as anyone else. I would love to see that happen. But at the same time, I think that we live in a culture where they don't want that often to be in the first conversation. And when you throw it in there, you shut down permanent relationship with that person, or you put yourself in a place where it's going to take a really long time to recover. And so that's one of the things I'm thinking about, is where does that balance lie? Because you see in scripture times where there's clearly street preaching happening, where the presenter doesn't know the people intimately, and the audience doesn't have a relationship with them. And you see that, but then there are other times you see relational building in it. And where's that balance to be found? And I think that that's hard. I mean, it's tough because it's somewhat situational, but I feel that we're in that age of the parish, like you're talking about, where the majority of people, maybe that 85%, if you put it in the first conversation, you're ruining the opportunity for it in the future. So I'd be curious about what you think about that.
You know, I like to answer questions in odd ways, maybe because I don't have good ones. I took 10 ministers to the Sturgis bike rally in Sturgis, South Dakota. You know, it's the world's largest motorcycle rally. You know, what could go wrong there? And we set up a booth on Main Street, and it is, oh my gosh. You know, my first day, I scratched my eyes out. I fell on the ground. I couldn't breathe. I spit up blood. And then the second day I was fine. We put up a giant sign on Main Street, says, "Does your tattoo have a story?" And we got the whole range of responses, from anger to tears to hugs to middle fingers to people coming and joining our team. And the thing that I've learned about tattoos is they are sacred. And the biggest misstep I make is I think I get it and I understand it. And the first answer the person gives is really the deepest answer. Because one is, tattoo owners often decoy the listener, because why would I tell you about the death of my 2-year-old? You know, Chris, instead I'm going to tell you, I was just a drunk night, right? And I found the prevalence of decoying. And so I want to say something odd. The disciplines needed in seeing, engaging, hearing, and earning the trust of a tattoo are the disciplines of evangelism of parish in our age, in my opinion. I didn't care that I didn't care about for tattoos for 55 years. You know, I don't have any. That's those people. They don't fit in my brick and mortar. And now we live in a space where the most intimate secrets that the image of God is saying, and they are precious. And that's one of the reasons why I don't rush in with an answer. I try to hold that holding part, listening and hearing and holding. It's very important in this time and space. Can I hold someone's pain? Is a key piece in the evangelism encounter. And the brick and mortar tends to rush the process of conversion, and that's why we're just simply recollecting church people, largely. Any other thoughts, friends?
Someone had just made a mention of prayer in the whole process too. And I think that that's good. That gives us a real opportunity to listen to people by asking them how we can pray for them. I know that, so I don't know if this is a good example or not, but so I'm in Terre Haute, Indiana now, you know that. I planted a church in State College, Pennsylvania prior to this. And one of the things that we got into the habit of doing was on Friday, and we would intentionally go on Friday nights because we knew it would be the bar crowd. We would go down to the busiest intersection in State College, and we would hold up signs, and it would just, our signs just said free prayer. And we just waited for people to come up, and they'd be like, free prayer, what is that? It's like, isn't all prayer free? Or like, well, sometimes people can ask to pray for you because they have an agenda to get you plugged into whatever it is they're doing. We're out here trying to give the impression that we just want to care for you. We want to love you. We want to pray for you. We want to hear, you know, what it is that you need to go to the Lord about, and we can go to the Lord together. And so that was an amazing ministry. Of course, it was scary because you would get people that would make fun of us and, you know, do obscene things. But man, the people that we met through that, and just the opportunity to pray with people. And there were times where it opened up the door where people would ask, well, what is it that you do believe? And we would get an opportunity to share the gospel through that. But that wasn't in every conversation. And for
they
us,
would ask.
Okay.
Yeah, they would ask you.
Yep. And it was interesting. We had, last thing I'll say, I had one group of Muslim guys that started coming every week. There's like 5 or 6 of them. They would engage us in respectful conversation. Like, they weren't there to make fun of us. We didn't make fun of them. You know, and that was, man, I'll tell you what, doing that brought life back into me and to my ministry. Anyway, go ahead.
What brought life back into your ministry?
Well, I felt like I was actually loving people, because I think I'd fallen into that ministry of agenda, because there were expectations of me as a pastor to produce something specific. And that tainted everything that I did in ministry in a very self-centered way. And it became so destructive to me, to where I knew in my heart I wasn't loving people well. And I just felt like coming back to this model reminded me of how much of a joy it is just to be able to love people, and not expect anything in return. Then I didn't have to walk away saying, well, I failed because it didn't bring someone into my church, or it didn't put money into the offering plate, which is what I was with another denomination before now, that church plant, but they had expectations of those kind of things. And so I don't know, I'll end there.
You know, in the residency cohort, which Chris Ruffner is part of, I think in this way, and this is counterintuitive, and I am oftentimes less interested in you sharing the gospel quickly than I am with them becoming part of your parish, and they become it becomes a long game. There have been people that have been in my parish all 4 years that every time I see them said, Pastor Al, I don't believe any of that stuff. And I'll hug them and I'll say, yeah, but guess what? I believe it for you. And they go, you would, wouldn't you? That's a parish conversation, right? And I believe we have now re-entered the age of the parish. And my dear friend Pablo, I think if his going into public and giving presentations work you're going to find me his first lieutenant in cheering him on. I find we now live in a culture where people are writing the most intimate things all over their skin. And I think I can understand that in one conversation. It often takes a year or two. And I've got about 8,000 tattoo buddies now. And a lot of them report to me when they get a new tattoo, and they kind of do all the work. And I'm going to show you some stuff next week on Thursday of some of my tattoo interviews. I see James Nichols is on. James, how are you?
Doing well, Al. Thanks for asking.
I'm not used to you being so quiet. What's the deal?
Zoom meetings are an interesting interaction amongst a large group of people, and you have a lot more to say that is a lot more wise than anything that I could say.
Yeah, but you're a lot bigger than me.
That's true, but that doesn't matter in a Zoom meeting.
God bless you, friend. I see Kent Morlick on. How are you, friend?
I'm doing well. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to listen, and I guess to thank MNA, right? Is that who's hosting this?
Yes, Bent Tree with MNA. Bent Tree is part of MNA.
Interesting. Yeah, you always have me thinking a lot of questions. And just the last question that came to my mind is, and I don't know if you addressed it, about your parish in this days of pandemic. What you've been doing lately? Working out?
Well, I go to West Virginia. I have property out there that's worth about $5, but it's my little secret place. But we do Zoom, and Blue Church has something called a beer run where we deliver beer to shut-ins. And that actually, beer is a metaphor for food, for an emergency dance, for actual beer and wine, just a visit. And so it's sort of the Blue Church way of some of our shut-ins that we do something called a beer run. But we have Zoom every week, and that's been something very sweet. We found this habit in non-Christians that they don't like going in church buildings if they can't see the exit door and they can't get out easily. And Zoom, all you got to do is press mute, right? Or exit. So some interesting things going on there with our tribe.
Now, I appreciate that one statement because that's related to another question I've had. I've had some people say, I'm afraid to go to your church because I don't want to upset what's going on there. And where I am, I'm way out in the country. I don't have an alternative location except to go meet somewhere else. But I've picked that up a few times. I'm going to be too much trouble to your church.
So can I talk at a macro level, Kent?
Absolutely.
So you heard me talk about the Revoice group, right?
Right.
Does everybody know what that is?
Yeah.
This is my opinion. We're really not talking about the real issue. The issue is, can we fit these people in our buildings? And the culture has now acted out with all this sexual deviation. Now we have a huge autistic level that can't sit for an hour and watch that guy stand up and down. They can't even sit in the room. Yeah. It's not something that works for them psychologically. There's a huge portion of the population that if one guy is talking, they hear their abusive father. So so we have all these people that don't fit in this service, church service, that comes every 3 days for a minister, by the way. And so now we've re-entered the age of the parish, and all my homosexual friends, whom if I could just say it this way, I love them. And we have jokes, and they say, Al, you're my enemy, but you're not. And I go, yeah, I believe in one man, one woman, but you know what? I'm fiercely protective of you. but that's not done in a building, it's done in the wild. And we are now in a life space where the wild has gotten really wild and doesn't fit in our buildings anymore. Can't argue with me in case I'm off.
No, I recognize that. My argument would be, and not for the sake of argument, but I've got 5 children. They're all minors. I'm trying to raise them. I appreciate thinking. I appreciate academics. They're smart kids. I don't want them to be raised in a dysfunctional environment. I don't want them to have tattoos all over their body. I want to train them in the way that I understand discipleship, but then I have to wear this other hat for another group of people, and I see a collision of worlds. Does this make sense to you?
Yes. And so here's my view. I'm going to come in a different window on this.
Sure.
I don't think we should talk about tattoos to our children like we shouldn't ever talk about sex, because that fixes everything, right?
Absolutely.
We are now heading into a life space. Let me give you an example. I was in Huntington, Alabama. I mean, does it get any more conservative than Huntington? Is it Huntsville or Huntington? Huntsville. Huntsville, Alabama. You know where one of the biggest BDSM communities in the country is?
Yeah, sure.
Huntsville. And where you find super, super conservative, you often find super, super crazy.
Makes sense.
And so this is now the life space we are called to minister in. Do I have to walk in my bar, with some carefulness? Sure. That they all know my wife is very helpful. That I get a reputation, that I bring them to my home, but that's my parish. And I think I'm unshockable. And I said this to one of my cross-dressers, Ken, just to give you an idea of where my thinking goes. I said, dude, I don't care if you fall into heaven in a dress, just get there. And so the culture is acting out without a minister right in the middle of them. Do I think you can visit as a minister in a gay bar in your community and check in on them once a week and get to know guys? We had a resident that did all his research in a gay bar. It changed the whole trajectory of his life. You want to find the most articulate being in America? Talk to a gay man.
Oh, well, yeah, I've got plenty of former high school group students who I keep up with on Facebook, and some of them are agitated and some of them believe they're Christian. But, we still go forward.
Thank you for doing that, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Al.
Yeah.
I'm not Gary. I attend Gary's church.
Well, you sure don't sound like Gary.
Hey.
How are you? We met when I was down there, didn't we?
Yeah, you did. My husband and I, we met. And my question is, just from reading the books and listening to you talk, I don't know if this will vibe with anybody else in the group. Does it seem like this particular culture is requiring or demanding or in need of more intimacy? Like they need to, because my daughter is gay and God's redeeming her, and she's come back to church and she's abiding in church. And so she's having her story retold.
God bless her.
Redone by God. And so my question to the group or to you is, does it seem like this generation is requiring less corporate church, like boom, God.com, God Inc., and really wants like more intimate, to know that God's not going to reject them on a cellular level if they mess up or they won't be ousted? Does it seem like they just crave more intimacy, maybe more than me? I came through the 70s and 80s, and I kind of did so because I was told so. Does it seem like this generation just needs more intimacy?
You and me both went through the 70s and 80s. So I think good music stopped at the late 70s, by the way. So I absolutely, You know, when I walk in my bar, it all begins. Oftentimes I have to work on getting this quiet because 20% of my bar has some pretty severe mental health issues, but they fit in that space. They fit there. And they'll come tell me something in excitement or anger or tears or rage. And the question is, can I hear what they're saying? And then there'll be different levels of people want to encounter me. And they, let me tell you what happened once to answer your question in an odd way. I was in my bar. My wife says I can only say in my bar 10 times. I was in my tavern, and somebody grabbed my hand and put it on their shoulder and said, do that thing you do. I go, what are you talking about? They said, do that thing. And I go, you're going to have to help me. And they said, you walked up to us and put your hand on us and said, bless you. And I said, oh. And I put my hand on him and I said, bless you, Bruce. And those things bring me to tears because they're so simple, but they actually want me to touch them. Am I making any sense? So the answer is yes. And I think presence is everything. People ask me about Blue Church. What is success? Walking in the space. That's my success. Walking in the space.
Thank you.
Pablo, you've been quiet, dude. What are you thinking?
I'm just thinking what the other brother said. You have more wisdom. I don't want to take up your time, but I do want to say though that the context of the question that I asked you was because in the book you were passing by, so you'll never see this person again. So that's why I was saying maybe in the book, and I'll buy it if you tell me right now there is gospel presentation there. I'll buy your book when it comes out. But you'll never see them. You never see them again. And we have an ESL ministry in our church. We teach English to the community, and we average about 300 of them a year of the community.
Wonderful.
22, 27 different countries. You know, and so during our break, we give them some coffee, some cookies. We got them in the cafeteria. And I make it a point to share the gospel, not because I want them to come to faith right there. If God wants to, he can do it, but to plant the seed of the gospel.
Yeah.
They might not come again. As I see every Monday, we have different groups because their work schedule changes or they move. They're very transient people. So that was my only point was, you know, what's the word I'm thinking for? If I'm not going to see him again, there has to be, I mean, maybe a track or something that we give them because it's a seed, you know. And thinking about it now, we had a testimony of a student that has been coming for us for about 3 years. And I didn't know this, but she came and she gave a testimony at our church when we tried to start the year again. And she said that she prayed to receive Christ as I was giving the presentation. And this was, I mean, I don't know, in this period of 3 years, I don't know when she did it, but so God is at work. You know, God is at work, and do I want him to come right there? Yes, but it's in God's timing, you know, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen if we don't share the gospel, I believe, you know.
So you and I aren't, we're not far off. Fred, do you have a thought for us? Fred Marsh, are you on?
Yeah, well, I had just had sent a note to Al. Hey, Pablo, Fred Marsh here. It's been a while.
Hello, nice to see you.
I last saw you there in Coral Springs, yeah. You know, my understanding, secondhand information more because I haven't carefully read it all, but Hernando has talked about the research that Ed Stetzer did, where in the Hispanic community, there is still very a great responsiveness in the U.S. to very direct presentation of the gospel, like it was in the larger culture 30 years ago or longer, back say in the 70s and 80s when evangelism explosion was strong and that sort of thing. So that I think that responsiveness would create a different context. In other words, I think perhaps in the Latino communities there would be less offense at sharing the gospel, whereas you walk into your blues bar and you directly share the gospel, that's the end of the conversation. I think in many, as I understand it, my direct
that's correct,
of course, is limited, but as I hear this research and hear others talk, it sounds like there is a responsiveness where then the conversation continues and it is engaging rather than confrontational and disengaging. Is that on track a bit, Pablo, with what your experience is?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm going to tell you what the problem that I'm facing now. We get about 120 a week, and I give this. I use a Bible verse, and I pick 3 words because I want them to think that I'm still teaching them English.
Mm-hmm.
But the words from the verse. And what I've been finding out is that the board that you wrote over there, and one of the words is that human beings, they want to feel religious, but they don't want to make a commitment. So I've heard from them telling me that for them those 10, 12 minutes is their church.
Mm-hmm.
And it frustrates me because I want them to have more than that. I want them to to come to church and bring their families, but they actually believe that those 10, 12 minutes, that's their church. They call me pastor, and I think that's my bar. I think that's my blue bar that he talks about. I meet with them, to drink coffee, not that I'm saying this for any other reason other than God is at work, but some of the marriages have been fixed and they're not even part of our church. They're part of our ESL ministry. But I never been rejected. They're very open. I do ask for permission to, you following the EE model. But I found those things that they feel at that time in the cafeteria, those 12 minutes, that's their church.
Yeah.
Fred, one of the things that Pablo is doing is he's doing parish ministry.
Right.
But the current metric of the Sunday morning 11 to 12 is the only model we've given him. And you're actually inventing parish, Pablo. And I just want to commend you for that, my friend.
See, I hear you engaging in ministry in your ESL context and the less structured, even that is a church context, but it's less structured than the worship service, the Sunday morning experience. But that has become your parish in the way Al is describing. What I hear as a difference culturally is you are free, and it might even be engaging, many times is engaging, to share the gospel without a really strong relationship already established, and that can lead to further relationship, where most of the folks Al is working with, that would be a cutoff, and the opportunity for gospel conversation comes later. But it sounds like you're very much in that same kind of parish context where they are seeing you as their pastor.
By the way,
outside of the walls of the church.
By the way, we have the giant of parish in our midst with Dan Quackelar. Dan, are you there? This is the giant of parish.
Literally and figuratively.
Might be giant physically. Yeah, I was just talking in our breakout group about that. I'm not sure I am, El, and maybe you can help me think this through a little bit. But my neighborhood is highly transitional. so I do get a high percentage of people from the neighborhood who come to attend, but I also, in my neighborhood, has a high percentage of evictions. So what'll happen is we'll get somebody for 2, 3, 4 months, then they get evicted, and then they're on the other side of the city. And so it's very difficult in that transitional kind of world to maintain relationships with people and to build on that long term. And so, you know, it is very localized ministry. For those of you who don't know, I minister in the inner city of Milwaukee. We have a place to do worship where in an area where people don't have cars, and they're, you know, the bus if they got that, and so there's a lot of people in the neighborhood that just walk to church, and they find out about us and they come. But it's hard to keep a relationship. It's just really difficult to maintain that. So we had, I'll give you an example. 13-year-old Antonio Price comes. He says, I want to learn how to play the drums. And I say, Antonio, have you ever played the drums? No, I haven't really played the drums ever. And I said, really? You live in the neighborhood? He said, yeah, I live down the street. His uncle came one time. Nobody else in his family comes. He's by the way, totally afraid of being judged by God and going to hell, right? He's just scared to death that God hates him or God will judge him for what he's done. So I started building a relationship with Antonio, me and some of the other folks in the congregation, and we add him to the worship team. We say, we'd like you to play. And he says, I've never played before. And I said, well, give it a try. You know, so turns out he's a natural talent. And so Rob Honey, who's one of the other drummer in the group, takes him under his wing and starts working with him. So he's coming now every Sunday, and he decides he doesn't want to practice with a worship team. He wants to be in Sunday school, studying the Westminster, going through scripture, using the Westminster as a guide. He comes to faith. He begins to understand what grace means. He begins to understand his freedom, and then he gets evicted. And so the next thing I know, I don't know where he is. And he's got no Wi-Fi, no way to contact him. He doesn't have a phone. So the way I communicate with Antonio is I leave a message with him on Facebook Messenger. And when he picks it up, he gets to respond if he gets close to Wi-Fi, because he's got a cell phone, but no phone service. So it's very difficult to manage this relationship. So he wound up out on Silver Spring. I'm driving out, 4 or 5 miles to pick him up, to bring him to church. So you see, Al, where all of a sudden this very close parish ministry winds up being not parish at all. It's other side, well, not the other side of the city, but a good distance away.
I want to speak into that because you're one of my heroes, by the way. And so in my parish, there are people I see every week. There are people I see once a month. There are people I see every 3 months. There are people I see once a year. There's people I see once every 4 years. They're my parish. And it's in the macro level of how a minister walks through the world is not how many people he gets in that space on Sunday morning, but instead the way he walks through the world is something we need to think about. Now, I want to, and you're doing it. Now, I want to add something else to you. This book that I have coming out called The Confessor, I wrote this for you, darn you. And you are one of the best confessors I have ever met. Can I say something odd, Dan? This is what I found is one of the characteristics of among our best confessors is they fight depression. And the space that depression takes up creates a listening space for the culture. Am I making any sense?
Yeah.
My friend, my generation, well, you and I are the same age. We told you what success is, how many people you get in that space at 11 o'clock. You are a confessor in our midst of listening and hearing and holding and watching faith and healing stir. This is you, my friend.
Well, I think I've got a huge amount to learn. I've got a huge amount to understand. And
we don't have an encouragement place around you to tell you that what you're doing is absolutely supernatural.
Well, I've got Chris. Vogel's a good guy. But yeah, you know what? I have long thought about becoming an ET resident, and I'm not even sure how much. Do you mind if I ask how much being a resident is?
It's $1 million a year.
Holy cow. Okay, so that's probably not in my budget then.
But Fred makes loans.
Say that again?
Fred makes loans.
Well, here's the thing is...
Get one from the federal government if you act fast.
Yeah, I think I was a little slow on that one. Anyway, there's a whole nother... I have budget for GA this year, and now that's gone. So, or a portion of it is gone. So I'm just wondering if I've got money in my budget for GA, can I redirect that to something else? But
let me tell you what it costs. It's $5,900 a year in 12 payments, or 56 in one. We do up to 50 evangelism case studies in a year. You're part of a cohort of about 20 active guys. We do 10 recirculating projects. It's my job to get inside of your head. That's my job, and fight for you. Mm-hmm. Dan, you are a man that has been born in a different age and placed in a unique place with your skills. And we don't support your skills. And you are phenomenal at what you do. But we've not defined you. And we keep putting you in this metric of the white Anglo-Saxon church plant. You're a confessor in the hood, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to put myself, Al, because the biggest demographic in my church is black, you know, and to be a black guy, to be a white guy in a black church with gang members as my leaders is weird. It's just weird.
Dan, tell them the story of the people breaking into your car. Could you tell this group that story?
Sure. I mean, that's a really good story. I have a Ring doorbell, and my neighborhood knows, you know, who I am. Everybody knows I'm a pastor. Well, they call me the preacher or the man of God, and so I'm, you know, there's a certain amount of respect that comes with that. So my Ring doorbell pointing out to the back, I had my, you know, Dodge Grand Caravan parked back there, middle of the night. Well, I should probably put it this way. I get into the car in the morning, and the cowling around the steering wheel is pulled off. And I'm wondering, what the heck is going on? Why is this? Did it explode? What happened? So then I thought, oh, let me check the Ring doorbell. So I went back and looked at all of the movement with my car, and somebody was trying to steal it. There were two guys came into the driveway in the backyard, and they come to the car, and I had accidentally left it unlocked. So the guy pulls open the driver's side door, and he's like, hoo-wee, you know, and he knows all you got to do is break that cowling off. There's a little ring. You get in there, you pull the ring, and you can start the car without a key, right? So easiest car to steal that there is, probably. And the other guy's looking inside the car to see what he could steal out of the car. He's looking inside. He probably saw the box of Bibles, and it occurs to him, he goes, hey, I think this is where the preacher lives. The other guy goes, really? They both get out of the car immediately and leave. Now, the reason for that is because unlike in the suburbs, in the city, there is still respect for Almighty God. And they are afraid, not of me, but they are afraid that if they touch the man of God, God will come after them. And so that level of respect is still there, and that level of honoring God is still there and means something in the city. And part of the result of that, Al, is that I don't think I would rather live any place else than in the inner city. And about 2 months ago, my wife came to me and said, "Thank you so much for moving me into the inner city." And I said to her, "Why?" Now here I am, I'm building friendships like I've never built in my life before with guys. But what I didn't realize is the same thing was happening to Sherry. And she said, "I have never built friendships that are this real and this powerful and this comforting and this, what's the word for it? This much filled with love and this deep ever before." I mean, we've lived in the suburb. I was a vice president at Highlights for Children magazine. We're living the high life. We never built relationships like what we're building now in the inner city. Why? Because in the inner city, you have relationships that are deep with people that you love or you die. And that is what has happened for us. And it's so warm and it's so loving, and it's just exactly where God knew I needed to be, just to be loved that much and to know that God is in the dark places that maybe aren't as dark as I thought they were. So.
I'm telling you, this book is about you.
Yeah.
Al, thanks again. I'm going to run. Thank you, Dan. Most encouraging.
Peace, Fred.
God bless. See you next week.
All right, my friend. Any other questions, you guys?
Well, thank you again, Al, for your time and your passion. And pray for all sinners down here in South Florida.
Man, you guys, you know, in the winter, I'm called to South Florida. I just want you to know.
Oh, the winter?
Yeah, in the winter, I'm called. It's amazing how I hear God's voice very clearly to come down.
Yeah, we made a little joke when you came, after you came to South Florida. We made a little joke with the pastors there. You know, in Colombia, there's a soup. There's a soup that takes about 6 hours to boil because the meat is so tough. And the word is mondongo. So we were talking, and we decided that your evangelism is mondongo. And mondongo is and mondongo is so delicious once it's done. And so, you know, I'm a chef as well, so I have some. I always make metaphors dealing with food and stuff.
Pablo,
but
that's the nicest compliment I've ever been given, my friend.
You know, but some people don't have the patience for mondongo. You know, they make a quick sandwich, and sometimes we miss out. I think when we try to make the quick sandwich, don't have the finished product that's beautiful. But thank you for your ministry.
So, any other questions before we go? We got 3 spaces for residents for this year open. Chris Ruffner's just jumped in, and James Nichols, when he has the second blessing, is going to jump in. And so, Godspeed, friends.
How long is that process? If I have a candidate to go, how long is the process?
It's 12 months. It's up to 50 evangelism case studies. It's 2 hours of phone coaching a month. It's 2 to 4 hours commitment a day or a week. You're part of a larger cohort.
Oh, they don't come physically to be with you?
It's at distance.
Oh,
and
okay.
Though if it's warm where you are, when it's cold here, I will come in town.
Ah, nice.
So.
And how much you said it was?
It is $5,900 a year. And I only take on about 15, 16 guys a year. And every one of them is different. It's $5,900 in 12 payments or $5,600 in one. It's the core of what I do. The personality traits of our residents are everything from Eeyore to Donald Trump and everything in between. And all of them have an extraordinary way of evangelizing. And part of my job is to figure that out and really study the guy. But they do field work, and it's my job to give them permission to be a researcher that makes discoveries, and those discoveries then create resources of both belief and money and other people. But I've got about 14 guys right now in the PCA that are residents with me. And it's my joy. It's my absolute joy.
Great. All right. Thanks again.
Godspeed. Yes,
Al,
sir.
This is Kent.
Yes, sir.
So after these gentlemen or whomever are trained and they've completed their year, what is the most likely their next step?
Well, so here's what I do, Kent. I put a chain link fence around them the first year. Their job is not to go equip other people.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they learn something and go to equip, they stop going into the forest. And the thing that forms the residency at its deepest is the discoveries the resident makes. And it's my job to create a laboratory where he makes discoveries with his unique gifts. However, we do a monthly newsletter that is National Geographic on assignment. And so the average resident will send this newsletter to 50 to 300 people, and he is given permission to unwind his stories in the wild and make discoveries. So to give you an example of a discovery, I had a resident who had severe PTSD. He grew up in gangs. You know, there were bullets in his home as a kid, never slept, all that kind of stuff. And I was sitting with him in Chattanooga, and a motorcycle went by and he started shaking. I said, dude, what's going on with you? And he goes, nothing. I go, yeah, that's what I was thinking. And he unwound this PTSD he had. Here's what his wound discovered, that we tend to start in Genesis 3. You're a sinner going to hell, and that ignites PTSD. That ignites fight or flight in the PTSD of the culture. And what he learned is, with his tribe and his people and his parish, he started with the blessing in Genesis 1, and it's there. We're afraid of that blessing because it sounds so new agey, but the blessing of nature and the animals and the sun and the footsteps of God are all there. Now, does that lead to Genesis 3? It does. But his discovery in his own wound was, for years, he couldn't become a Christian because his fight or flight muscles was ignited by the hell message. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, I grew up in the shadow of the Crystal Cathedral, and there's been a large critique of, you know, the possibility thinking, and you're sort of on the edge of a preferred presentation, and I recognize it. I you know, covenant theology is a blessing and a curse, and we ought to engage making sure that we're just acknowledging the blessings as well.
To answer your question, the ignition point of the residency is the resident's discoveries, and he makes them. And he writes on them as a researcher, and we view that as National Geographic on assignment, and he gets to send that out. But I put a fence around him, and I say, we're not about equipping people in this first year. And I do a number of things with each resident to see things in slow motion and what they discover. The second year, and about 40-50% of the residents study with me a second year, we then turn into the church and we figure out how to replicate the residency discovery in a whole group of other people. And and I tend to be part of that at some point with workshops and conferences and residencies. Kent, the single thing that I am finding that is igniting our tribe in particular, the Reformed tribe, is discovery. And I'm doing a workshop next week on why is the wall of the bubble thickening? And I talk about the habits that is creating hindrances from us making discoveries. And by the way, with the absence of discovery, our mental health goes down as a minister.
Yeah, so, okay, so someone does 2 years, are they looking to be hired by a church, or are they starting their own ministry and continuing on in that, in the wild?
Well, one is they're already in a church. Okay. I mean, our average resident is either a church planner or a pastor in a church. But we're starting to see this is that people that get certificates for year 1 and year 2 are starting to become attractive as hires for larger churches that are in desperate need to make discovery outside their walls, which that, by the way, really excites me.
Yeah, that is
one of the trends that we're starting to see is some of our residents are looking at bringing on a resident into their systems. So these are ministers that are already there, but I'll tell you this, the earlier I can get to working with them, the more freedom they have to think and discover and imagine. Or if they're in their 40s and 50s and the dissidence that's in their mind has gotten so deep that they just get so tired of the system, they'll do anything, that they sort of have this temperament, Ken. I'm going to try one more time to make this work. And if it doesn't, I'm going to sell insurance.
Yeah.
And I like that frustration because that's an energy of making discoveries. And when that person makes discoveries, it's not me telling them. I do teach, but when you discover something, you get out of the truthing, telling, presenting metric and into the research, introspection, discovery. I've seen it just change the way a guy walks through the world as a man and as a minister. Our guys are tired of spending 10 hours on a sermon to preach to people that have heard 500 sermons. I'm not dissing that, but I'm saying there's more for the psychology of the minister. Am I off, Chris?
No, I think you're totally on. I value preaching, of course, as a church planting pastor, for sure. And I do want to say really quick, Pablo, thank you for your ministry down in Florida. I love your passion for the gospel and sharing the gospel with people. Keep it up, brother. Keep up the good work. I was thinking back earlier, Al, is we've been hearing through, or I've been listening to people talk. It reminded me of an encounter I had a few years ago. I'm going to talk while I move because my phone is about ready to die. I got to plug it in, so it's going to be awkward. But anyway, I was a bivocational pastor in my previous ministry, and I worked at BioLife Plasma Services as the center supervisor. And we had this new employee that came in one time. His name is Robert. Robert is gay, openly living the lifestyle. And I was in a room by myself one day, and he just walks in and says, because I was always introduced at work as a local pastor. Not that I asked them, it's just how they would introduce me when new employees would come in. And so he walks into this room when I'm by myself one day, and all he does is says, "Chris, I just want you to know I hate God." And he walked out of the room and walked away. And of course, there's that part of me that's like, man, I just really want to chase after him and talk to him. And to make a longer story short, for the next couple months, it was just every opportunity he could come up behind me or be in the room with me, even in front of other people, to make fun of me, to poke fun at God, whatever. I would just kind of sit back and listen. And one day I was just like, I looked at him and I said, "Robert, I have made a decision that I'm going to love you. And there is nothing that you can say at all." And do you know what? He stopped making fun of me. He stopped making fun of God. he actually started asking me questions about God. We had some really great theological conversations. But one day he was just asking me, he was like, you know, I've never have asked you, what do you think about my lifestyle? And I said, well, to be honest, I believe it's wrong. But back to what I said before, you know, I love you, and there's nothing change that you can do that can change my mind. And so here, what I came to find out is he grew up in a fundamental Baptist family. He came out of the closet when he was 17 years old. His parents drove him straight to the church. The two pastors of the church locked him in their office for an hour, and they fire and brimstoned him. And from that day forward, he has hated God. And so I was like, man, God gave me the grace to just be silent and to listen and to not try to jump in every time he would make a false statement to correct him with my theology. And that for him, I think that's what he needed. He wanted a person, a pastor, that would love him and just listen to him in the process. So I don't know what you want to comment about that story, but it's helped.
I think there are still cultures that truthing, telling, and proclaiming is working. For instance, the African, if somebody's a hardcore truthing, telling, and presenting, they almost always do mission trips to Africa. Almost always, because it works. You know, the whole tent revival thing. But even now, that's starting to wane. I think God uses negative, painful, wounding evangelism for good all the time. And I had a guy in my bar that talked about it was living in an evangelical father's home was an absolute nightmare. And it completely wounded him. And he yelled at me for about 3 hours one night. And I said, I'm sorry, dude. I'm just so sorry. I didn't present anything to him. But every time I walk in the bar, he buys me a drink, which is an iced tea. But that's all he can do. That's about as close as he can get. But I am his and he is mine. And what has happened is with our ministers is we've created this on-ramp that has to get this thing financially up and moving. And we've missed our parish as a result. And we've also missed our ministers growing and feeling their anointing in the wild, which is something they need for their own psychology. As you told that story, you came alive. You felt like you were actually ordained. And versus this presenting this piece of scholarship to people that have been in the church for 30 years. And I don't mean to diss that, but it's two different worlds.
Well, I think you said it right. There's cultures where that presenting and telling, that still works really well. And it sounds like Pablo is in that kind of a culture. So by all means do it. Like I'm fully behind you, brother. Go for it.
Absolutely.
Like, sure. But I've just learned that if I would have taken that approach with Robert, I would have never had conversations with God about him. It would have been shut down from that day forward. And yes, I wanted to get the gospel presentation out the first time. But I think what I've learned is I have to put my process of reaching people with the gospel in God's hands and not feel like I have to rush it and rush the timing. It's kind of like how God deals with our sin. I mean, I couldn't imagine if God walked in the room today and he unloaded everything about my sin in my life and expected me to change all of it right now in this moment. I'd fall dead on the spot. And that's not how God works with us. Like he bears with us patiently. Yes, calls us to continue holiness as he is holy, but he walks very patiently with us through that, like a parent does with their child. And so I'm trying to learn what does that look like in evangelism? What does it look like for me to discern, okay, is this a person that is ready for the truthing and telling? Or is this a person like Robert that I'm going to have to go in for the long haul and get him to trust me so that he can trust what it is that I'm trying to say to him? if that's making sense.
Oh, it is. So, you know, when I walked in the bar 3 years ago, Jan, who is a CEO of her own company, somebody introduced me as Pastor Al, and she gave me a middle finger. You know, if a biker gives me a middle finger, if a very unattractive woman gives me a middle finger, I'm okay. But if a gorgeous woman gives me a middle finger, it just does something to me, right? She gave me a middle finger for a whole year. I would walk in and she'd walk on the other side. And you know, I started joking with her a little bit. She'd give me a middle finger and go to somewhere else, and I would go, "You're late, you're late." And so after a year of that, she came to me and said, Pastor Al, can we have coffee? I go, "Sure, Jan." So she went to a coffee shop. She said, "Can we sit outside?" I said, "Sure." And she ripped into me for 44 minutes. I timed it. Oh, I don't get flustered. I don't get embarrassed. I don't get off my game. I did all those things. I mean, she hit my buttons and I was like gasping for air. And then she started crying and I said, "Jan, why are you crying, honey?" And she said, "You are my con man Christian father. You're it all over again." And I said, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." Well, not long after that, her brother died, and I was the first person she called, and she said, "Can you come to my home?" You know, and I'll tell you this story. So I anointed her with oil in my bar as a sign of her faith and presence in that thing. And she cried and cried and cried. But we play the long game, right? Because I am theirs and they are mine. And are there quick on-ramps? I think there are, like in the African culture and the Hispanic culture. And I don't claim I understand those cultures. I'm still a learner. Do you have time for one more construct?
Yeah.
Kent, are you still with us?
I am. I'm listening.
And James, you still with us?
I am. My headphones broke, so I'm on mute and asked a question through the chat.
Pablo?
Yeah,
So,
I'm here.
Here's a construct that I'm not asking that you buy into, but that you ponder. Over here is something called the Catholic Church. It has something in its building called a confessional booth, right? It's deep inside a building. They put a celibate guy in there. That's a great idea. And a few old ladies now use that confessional booth. I'm being a little snarky and disrespectful. But historically, confessional had a huge footprint in Christendom. If you study, you know, the monastic fathers and all of that, huge. Well, it's fallen out of disuse, partly because of the problems with the Catholic Church and all that. Over here, you have the Protestants, who their fundamental muscle still is protest. We are right. We have to tell. We have to truth. We have to present. And 85% of the population, by the way, has or is large part walked away from that metric. I'd like to say something. In the absence of the role of a confessor, tattoos have exploded. A vast portion of the population is going to the tattoo artist to tell their secrets and stories to, not the religious people. That's one of the reasons why this movement is so important to study, because people are writing their secrets on their wrapper in permanent ink, and it's like, whoa, what is this? It's the absence of the parish minister. Am I making sense, Kent?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you just real briefly, I did a seminar at a college for high school students, big high school day of training. And I was doing one on hurts and why God allows things to go wrong. And I was amazed that I had several students come up afterwards saying, "You didn't give us a chance to talk." And my first reaction was, "You're just a high school student. You don't know anything yet." And of course, you know, in that format, I didn't have 2 hours. It was just a presentation. Anyways, people really want to talk. They just really want to talk. And I guess we just don't give enough chance.
James, what are you thinking?
I like the idea of using, I mean, I haven't finished your tattoo book, and, you know, thinking about it being the confessional, I do think that people have this propensity, if you're going to get a tattoo, you know, even at the shallowest level, it needs to be something important to you because it's going to be there forever. And I also think that, at least for me, it's been a fantastic conversation starter because it shows my interest in them. It's not just that I'm, you know, whatever. And I think for me, the question is, I get this, I love this, I appreciate this. I think that this is the direction we're going. I 100% agree that the parish model is where we're at. Shepherding, small groups, you know, things like that, both in church and out of church. How do we get the church at large to stop truth-telling and to start relating?
Let me say my answer, and then I want you to push back, okay? I don't think we do. I don't waste my time. So I think we go do it. I mean, Jesus didn't start with the world, he started with 12. I think we go do it. And this is one of the freedoms in life, is when you think you could just go do it. When I have a booth at General Assembly, you know, I set up my little tattoo and book, and I've got my little thing there. Guess how many evangelism experts come up and instruct me, James?
I don't know.
Like a lot. Like a lot. You know, that they are the expert. And maybe they are, but they tend to be very reformed, very theological, right? This is how I deal with that. I say, thank you for that thought, and God bless you, and I will think about that. In other words, when your runway ahead starts getting less and less, you start putting your resources where they work. And you make hard choices. I made a hard choice that the brick and mortar wasn't working for me. And it was a radical thing for me to go in the bar. I mean, I'm going to, on the workshop where I talk about the 6 seasons in my bar, I mean, the first one was brutal. If I would say to you, if you're going to spend your life waiting on the church to change, you're going to die waiting. But this is your time and your space to be faithful and invent. And you're still a young man, James. And invent, my friend.
I appreciate that. I think probably what I'm driving at is, you know, as I go out and do this myself, but also have the responsibility as a pastor over the congregation, what are the easiest, most effective ways to help reorient their minds away from truth-telling and into relationship? I think that's my deeper question. I understand what you're saying. I do it on my own. I think that actually has some major impact, is for them to hear the stories of how I've done this. But as I teach, I feel like one of the first things I have to do is overcome this hurdle of the truth-telling. You know, this model that they've so quickly and well, I shouldn't say quickly, that they've slowly adapted, that worked in the 70s, and they're finally getting around to understanding it. And now it's changed. So how do I, as I teach, as I train, as I engage congregation members, what is the best way to help them understand relational versus truth telling?
Al, can I speak into that really quick?
Please, please.
Okay, so Al, you've sparked this for me, and I don't know how you said it or where you said it, or it might have been in one of your books, but I think about the ways that I would often do sermons in the past, which is not inherently wrong, right? I would do a sermon, and my illustration would be something from church history. I'd pull in a quote from Augustine. I'd quote Martin Luther. I'd quote non-Christian philosophers, and then build off of that. And what my people were then doing is they were going back to Luther, and they were going to Calvin, and they were reading Augustine, which is not bad. Those are all great things. But I started to incorporate stories from my experiences of being in the wild, from the pulpit, in my core team meetings, in my Bible studies, and then that became a living example for them of what to do. So I don't think it has to be either or. I think it could be both and. But I think the more that we tell the story of our experience, it's the whole idea of things being caught instead of taught type thing. And hopefully they'll be inspired to go out and do the same thing.
Yeah, to reinforce that, now, James, I don't know anything about your church, but the average guy that kind of works with me as an assistant is in a pretty rigid church. This is how we do things, and we keep our base, and church service comes every 3 days, and we make sure there's no typos in the bulletin, and it's the ship's run because it's always run that well. But here's the things I've seen in the residency, 3 things that happen as we begin to work together. One is stories, which is what Chris just said. 2 is the understanding that we are now in the age of the parish. My generation taught your generation, what good is your efforts if they're not getting in a building? Guess what? They're not getting in a building. And the third thing is the ethos of discovery and imagination. And that's a muscle that takes time to develop in you and in them. And we're in an age, James, if we put a job title on you that is measured by how many non-Christians you get in your building, you're going to break and mentally come apart. You don't know anything about that, do you, Chris? So, are you resonating? What are you thinking, Chris? Agree or disagree?
I agree. I don't feel like I need to really comment more. I think that was well said.
Thanks, guys.
That's
helpful.
Yeah, go ahead, Pablo. What are you thinking?
No, I just brought my memory. As I mentioned to you, my frustration with my ESL ministry. I know their background. I know they have a Roman Catholicism, and many of them from the Hispanic countries. They feel like those 10, 12 minutes is their church. So I did into frustration. I remember, throwing a little. Al throws a little. What do you? And I told God, everything, and I mean, very little visit on Sundays. So I remember telling God, you know what, God, give me their kids, give me their kids, give me their grandchildren, and through that, He grew our soccer ministry in the summer. We began a soccer ministry. First year we had about 60 kids, where we teach them, we go to special soccer balls that have the colors of the gospel. We do the day.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
That's great.
Pablo, the thing that I want to say to you, I feel compelled, is thank you for that 12 minutes and your parish ministry. That's not failure, that's success. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and so, ministry grew out, which we have every year now, 60 to 70 kids. And we are planting seeds of the gospel with them as well. And that's how I came to Christ. I came to Christ through my brother, a pastor, put together a little baseball team in the neighborhood. And then he brought the pastor to my house named Bill Iverson. And so he led me to Christ. And so I felt like I was doing exactly what my father, my spiritual father did, put together a soccer team. I just have a quick question. I want to understand correctly. You don't have a church then. You don't have a church of believers. All you mentioned is a bar, or is that a name for a group? Is that an actual bar?
It's an actual bar, and I have a group that meets in the bar every week.
Well, a group including like people from your church?
You mean from the bar? In other words, the only people that make it into Blue Church are already in the bar. And do we have believers in there? Absolutely. So anywhere from 15 to 50 people come to our service. But that's our church. So people say to me, Al, when are you going to get those people in a church? We're already there. Am I making sense, Pablo?
I think he was also asking Al if you still had the brick and mortar.
I don't.
Yeah.
What happened to the people? What happened to the people that you had at one time? Are those the ones that go to the bar and meet with you there, or
what
happened to them?
Oh no. Well, it unwinds in the Blues Bar book, but I just one day, I started the church. We built a big building. It filled up right away, and I just said, all we did is collect Christians from the struggling churches around us, and I didn't want to stay there. I just said, I don't know what to do. So I went in the Blues Bar, and one day I said, this is where I'm staying. And the people said, well, what do you want us to do? And I said, there's a church on every corner. They said, we'll follow you. I said, I don't think you want to go into a bar because kids can't come in. We sold the building. We built at the height of the market, right? That was a great thing. Just like everywhere, there's a church every quarter mile. And I said, find one. And a third did that. A third was pretty mad at me. A third tried out the bar, and a number of them are still in there with me. But what is different about a parish is I go into that space, and about 1,000 people come to this bar a month. I am theirs and they are mine. And any night I walk in, I'll get 20 prayer requests. This is one of the things I've learned about our current space is we don't understand what a parish is. We still only have a brick and mortar metric of what church is. And so I have a guy that says, well, when are you going to get them in a church? And I say, we are a church. And they say, well, when are you going to get them in a church? And I say, we are a church. And that's about as far as we've gotten.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Well, again, I had to do something, but I figured more important listening to you guys. Now I really have to go. But thanks again for your time, guys. God bless you.
God bless you. All right. Take care, brother.
Kent, I'm willing to do a free workshop for the ARP group if they're open.
Yeah, I'm the rebel ARP minister. I was trained in the truthing and the presenting, and that still really animates me. I love learning something that I can share with other people from the scriptures, and I want them to have a Christianity that is informed and excited by the Word of God. So that's a big part of my own personality. Many people have told me a number of times that you probably should just be a seminary professor. So that's sort of, but I can't tell you how many times I've just busted up laughing listening to you. Thankful for the mute button, because you just say a lot of things that I totally, yeah, you're right on. Those things are so in your face true. It just makes me happy to hear it. So I'm just in this weird place that the Lord has me. I'm very Calvinistic. I keep on hearing you quote from goodness gracious, the book of Ruth and the covenant blessings of being God's people and he being our God. I mean, I love all that, but I feel like, you know, what's my, like the closest bar to me here is 10 miles away. There's, I am just out here. And I just feel like, well, should I just start telling my elders we need to probably build a new place for people to meet? Because your little cute little country church on the edge of town isn't going to bring anyone except for 60-year-olds. It's just kind of a weird space I'm in.
I have an idea for you.
I like ideas.
Is do a Tattoo Story Hunters booth at the next festival closest to you and get all your elders to sit in there. And your only job is to say, does your tattoo have a story, and listen.
You know what? Okay. So that was genius. We have the country fair that meets on our church campus. 5,000 people come to this little country. That's like, that like triples the size of our community.
You will be mobbed. You'll be mobbed. You'll be shocked at what they'll do.
And can I pay you to come out?
The answer is yes. What I do is if you buy 150 books, I can come.
You just don't want raw money,
so,
huh?
Which covers, it's all about money. So.
Listen, I understand that. That's one thing our church is not short of. But if I had you come out for that event and I made my elders sit around with you, because, you know, I'm busting my butt that day. I'm doing a ton of things, and it's organized by a civic group. They just use our campus. It's just in the center of the town.
They use your campus. What do you mean?
You know, we're the geographic center of our community, and
your real estate is?
Yes. Yes.
Oh my goodness.
But it's a small community, and we have a school next door to us, a Christian school next door to us. We're really insulated here, and just.
The answer is yes, I do, and I make it fun. Nobody's manhood's nobody's manhood's put at risk. I sort of talk about it. We laugh. I did one with one group that there was 8 elders behind me,
mm-hmm.
and they watched me do it all day long because they couldn't say, "Does your tattoo have a story?" It was too frightening, but they watched all day. And that was enough for them. That was the baby step they needed.
That could be something that we could do. The last Saturday of September. But you know, I'm also in this situation. We've only got 2 people here now. Hi, Chris. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Kent. How are you?
All right. You know, I have just been fighting with my elders for 7 years. They don't rotate. They run this church. I'm their boy, you know. I'm bringing in new people who like theology, but as long as I don't rock the boat too much, I get to be here. But, you know, what can I say? I'm in a good groove, thankful for it. Like I said, I'm raising 5 children, homeschooling them, loving on them, spending more time with them than I ever got from my dad. So I'm gonna I'm not happy with everything, but it's still a sweet spot, so I'm going to take it. It's the tensions, you know, so.
How old are you, Kent?
Yeah, I started late. I'm going to be 58 at the end of this year.
Okay, wow.
That's
Well,
when
thank you
that's when life begins, baby.
Well, I've been young at heart. I'm still playing sports and keeping up with my kids and stuff. So
I want to say something, Al. You can correct me if this is a misunderstanding of how you think. But Kent, what I want to say is I really value your passion for knowing deep theology, for knowing God's word deeply and having a strong desire to share your discoveries with other people. I don't think Al is saying that's not necessary. I think he's saying that it is necessary. But what Al is saying is that we're now in the age of the parish, where a lot of the people that we are ministering to, it's not that they don't want to ultimately hear those things. That's just not what they want to hear first. What they want to hear first is that you love them and that you care for them. And once you've made them feel that way and you've gained that trust and that respect, they're going to start asking you, and that truth that you so love from God's word is going to have more than ample opportunity to speak. Now, you obviously need to be careful and keep listening in the midst of all that. Would that be an accurate interpretation of where you're at, Al?
You know, the answer is yes. And one of the things Kent says is, I kind of got built to be a seminary professor. I don't know if I'm quoting you exactly right. The system built all of us to be seminary professors.
Yeah.
And it said, go make as much discovery as you can inside the church building. And we are now in a space where the wild is getting wilder, and we don't even know how to think about it, walk about it, discover it. And so we keep recircling people that need more information.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. That resonates with me completely. I mean, I got away from California to get to where I thought I could have a little sanity for my kids. But the world continues to go, and we're just all amazed at how things are transpiring. So I value and appreciate what you're doing. I don't know if necessarily all my friends do. And you have your opinions of the ARP, and they're probably not, so far from what's really going on. We're a church that's not going to survive unless some kind of infusion, unless we circle up with someone else.
Can I, do you guys have 3 more minutes?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. I want to do something. I'm going to do a mini, why is the wall of the bubble thickening, Kent?
I was very interested in attending that next week.
Okay, I'm not going to give you all the pieces, but some of it. Here is our fundamental habit. Everybody knows we're in a bubble, right? Everybody knows that we're in a bubble. We don't know how thick it is because we're looking from the inside out, right? We don't know if it's paper thin or 100 miles thick. We don't know. We do know that 85% of the population is not coming back into structure. They're not. And so guys that have ministered in our time space have spent our whole life recollecting church people and trying to get non-Christians in our building that rarely ever works. And so our mental health goes down and we begin to believe we're not faithful. This is the habit that we do. This is the habit that we picked up on. What we do is we start from the center of our orthodoxy and we go to the edge of the bubble.
You need to do that next week. That actually helps illustrate.
We go to the edge. These are the hipsters, the church planters, the guys in their 40s and 50s that have this dissonance going on. And we're going to break that. But one of the problems is this wall is elastic. So you hit it, and the gravitational pull on it to get past it is very, very hard. Very, very hard. So this is the habit that we do. We vector back to the center and we perfect. This is the habit of our tribe. And every time we perfect, the wall gets thicker. Am I making some sense?
Well, let me just interject because, you're stimulating thoughts. And now I'm seeing that this thing's being recorded. I'm going to be hung if what I said gets out.
Well, let me turn it off. I didn't know this was on. Let me turn it off.
Yeah, well, that's not going outside of this, right?
No.
That's just for you. Then that's fine. I didn't know if this was still Bent Tree or whomever.